as if he's the first guy who ever said it, but a UTC exec raised eyebrows recently when in New York he very publicly called the state too costly to keep developing business here and said he found any place outside of Connecticut less expensive. Here to talk about the tone of those comments and the perception in general is Bonnie Stewart, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, and Mr. Wayne McCarthy, President of the local Machinist Union Lodge in Cheshire. Thanks, both of you, for being here. If we could just start off, Bonnie, your reaction to that perception that seems to persist.
There's definitely a feeling amongst business community leaders that Connecticut is an extremely expensive place to do business, and that something needs to happen in terms of the attitude towards businesses, and some of our laws need to be modified. So something needs to be done to encourage businesses to stay in Connecticut as well as to locate in Connecticut.
How long has that perception? I mean, it's certainly been around as long as I've been here, so...
It's definitely been around for several years. Unfortunately, it's been growing worse in recent years. So today, I'm going to view the comments by UTC as an opportunity in challenging times to, a wake-up call for the legislature and the administration so that we can take advantage of this legislative session to do some positive things for the state.
What sorts of positive things, Wayne, do you think should be done?
Well, I think that the Machinist Union has helped with trying to pass the legislation for energy costs and taxation so that they can be more competitive in Connecticut.
How competitive, though, whenever these kinds of comments come up and these kinds of business-unfriendly comments arise, people always talk about the South, and they talk about, we were talking earlier about South Carolina and about Georgia, and it's really kind of comparing apples and oranges, right?
Absolutely. If you're going to hold up a litmus test that if you cannot match the wages in Georgia and the conditions in Georgia, then the businesses are going to leave, then Connecticut's going to be in a tough situation. I don't live in Columbus, Georgia, where I can purchase a home for $80,000. I live here in Connecticut. The cost of living is higher, so the need for a better wage is there.
So how do you counter that? I mean, because that's a reality. It is a reality that if you live here, you need a better wage, so companies are going to have to pay higher wages.
Well, we're not just talking about the cost of labor. That is obviously a big cost because the cost of employing somebody in Connecticut is higher than somewhere else. So don't adopt any new laws to drive those costs up further. You don't want to price us out of the job market.
Right.
At the same time, as Wayne pointed out, we've got higher energy costs. We've got real regulatory issues when it takes, it's supposed to be 90 days to get a permit at the DEP, and it takes a year and a half. We need regulatory reform. That's a big issue. We actually need to work on our education system a bit to make sure that the kids that are graduating from high school are either ready for the workforce or ready to enter college. That's another big issue. So between the labor issues, the energy issues, regulatory reform issues, and just the whole issue of consistency and predictability when it comes to Connecticut's tax laws and spending laws. Those are important as well, because if you want companies to plan Connecticut in their future, they have to know what they can count on. Mm-hmm. And those are all issues that the business community has been raising for quite some time. And as Wayne pointed out, there are issues that we've worked together on and things that we need to continue working on together to make sure that we turn Connecticut around.
Well, let's talk about the energy issue. What is preventing that from happening? Because we've been talking about that for a long time. Why does that persist?
One of the things that makes Connecticut extremely expensive is that we don't generate a lot of energy here. So the more facilities that we can site here means more energy that's generated here and fewer LICAP costs, a federal fee that's charged to Connecticut, because we don't produce that much energy. That's one thing that we can do to reduce the cost of energy here. We can do a lot in terms of the regulatory reforms where DEP is concerned, not lowering our standards, but instead improving the processes so that we get permits in a much quicker manner, and that when someone has a simple paperwork violation, we're not slapping them with a $5,000 fine. Those are things that send messages in terms of, do we want Connecticut to have businesses or we don't? We definitely do. Let's show it.
Wayne, let's talk about your negotiations, particularly with Pratt. You said you have some frustration because you have tried to make it friendly, and you gave me one example.
Yeah, absolutely. In July of last year, Pratt & Whitney had announced that they had a plan to close the plant that I work at, the Cheshire Engine Center, and a smaller unit in East Hartford called Carroll. And we sat down with them for more than 45 days to try to come up with solutions. And we're willing to reduce the current wage that we make by 14%. We're willing to make some work rule changes that would add millions of dollars to their bottom line each year. And the state of Connecticut also stepped up with some incentives. But at the end of those discussions, Pratt & Whitney had decided that that wasn't enough.
So does that make you feel as if they were just wanting to leave regardless of whatever you put on the table?
Well, when you look back at it, you do think that they were not making their best effort, and Judge Janet Hall in Bridgeport agreed that they were not acting in good faith. Mm-hmm. She ruled in our favor in a recent court decision that they have to maintain that work through the life of this contract, and our goal is that the work remains longer than that.
So when you hear these comments being made, what do you think?
Well, I think what he said before that is also pretty upsetting, is that if we're unable to move work outside of the United States of America, then the least that UTC is looking to explore is to move to lower-cost states in America. But their end goal, if they had it their way, would be to abandon the United States altogether.
So then does that make either of you, throw up your hands and say, well, if I have to compete with Indonesia, then we're in a whole different ballgame, or?
Well, usually companies that are international companies try to have facilities throughout the world because their customers are throughout the world. We import a lot of jobs into Connecticut. We are home to, I believe it's roughly 1,200 foreign corporations. So we have to expect to export some jobs. Does that mean that we won't have any in Connecticut? Absolutely not. But it's important that we in Connecticut work to make sure that Connecticut is a place that welcomes business, and where we can, whether it be through regulatory reform, energy costs, labor costs, tax policy, do what we can to encourage companies that are here to stay here, as well as those that aren't here to locate there. It's totally up to us. The legislature has a great opportunity right now to show that they care and make some changes, and I think that we're all hoping that they do.
Speaking of lawmakers, I've been hosting a lot of panels for politicians. We have a very active political season coming up, or already underway. What are you, everyone will be looking for the union endorsement. What are your workers going to be looking for in a governor, say?
Well, in the governor, we're going to look at someone that's going to address our needs for retaining jobs. Like I said, Governor Rell and her team were stepping up to the plate. They are offered incentives to UTC, and they really make those broad to all businesses, not just specific to UTC. So that's what's good for business, hopefully, will be good for the workers.
Right, and hopefully we can use these comments, or you all can use these comments as a way to help move these things along.
Definitely.
Right, thanks to both of you, Wayne and Bonnie. Ahead, Tiger Woods is going to get back to work, but can he ever get back to the revered legend status he had before?